Welcome to the inaugural White Sox Recap podcast here on our Recap YouTube channel and wherever you get and subscribe to your podcast. I'm Ryan McGuffey, and I'm jacked up to be back in the White Sox podcast space. As many of you know, my longtime relationship with NBC Sports Chicago recently came to an end, which meant my partnership with my longtime friend Chuck Garfien on the White Sox Talk podcast did too. So now I'm back here on the recap, and I'm extremely excited to partner with former White Sox center fielder, first-round pick, 2005 champ. You might have remembered him from saving that 2008 blackout game with a diving catch. Brian Anderson. BA will be an amazing asset not only to me, but to all of you listening. So on to the podcast. The White Sox still don't have a manager. The World Series is starting this weekend. Who's in the mix? Who should they hire? Does having experience matter with this team? I'll ask BA that and so much more. It's the White Sox Recap Podcast, and it starts right now. All right, here we are. The White Sox Recap Podcast and Brian Anderson. Woo! I'm Ryan McGuffey. I'm not gonna lie to you, man. It's hard for me to contain my excitement. I'm pretty jacked up to be back doing podcasts and to have it with you. We go back a long way, and here we are. It looks like you might be in the bowels of maybe just getting out of a sauna or something behind you, but you look good.
Yeah, right. I got Jerry the giraffe back here hanging out, and we've been talking about doing something for a long time, man. So I'm extremely excited. Hopefully the fans don't hate me and you replace me a week one. So we'll start with one episode at a time. And if you don't kick me off the show, then we're ready to go.
I'm a big fan of the one game at a time approach, especially when we're talking about the Chicago White Sox. So look, man, a lot has happened, right? Since like the last time that you were probably on NBC Sports Chicago's airwaves, certainly with this team. 41-121 season. We know what that was and catastrophically bad and historically bad. And they're sitting here without a manager. I mean, Grady Sizemore was interim for the last 40 or so games. I'd say did an admirable job since he basically went from, $15 an hour intern to White Sox manager overnight. I know he at least was being considered for the job, but, BA, before we get into a list of some of the candidates, and I think even maybe finalists at this point, we're coming up on the World Series. Baseball doesn't like when big news is broken during marquee events like the World Series, especially the one we're looking at with Dodgers Yankees, maybe the biggest one, certainly in recent memory. What type of manager does this team, knowing that, like, when you think about if they improve 20 games next year, 20, which might be, that may be the best improvement of any team over in one season, 20 games, the White Sox would still be a 100-loss team. What type of manager does this team need?
Man, it's a loaded question. It's a long one, right? But I've been looking at this list, right, that we've talked about at great length. And first and foremost, you got to have someone who leads in the locker room and is a player's manager. One thing I loved about Ozzie, good, bad, ugly, he always had our backs, right? I could be playing terrible, and he's sitting there, and no matter what, I could be 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts, and he's like, hey, he played great center field. He's always going to protect the player. So you got to have the leadership component, but you have to have accountability. I mean, there was never, ever any time where I didn't run a ball out, right? I wasn't good enough to not run a ball out. There was never a time. I mean, Paul Konerko was sprinting, if you want to call it that, down the line because, he had bad hips or something. But, fans, the fans don't forget that. The players seem to forget, man. Like, you can always play the game hard. So accountability first, man. If you can show that these guys got some grit and show the fans that they're going out there and you're holding them accountable, the fans will always back you.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem that the White Sox had the last few years is that, Pedro Grifol even admitted after season 1, his first year, that he had 2 paths to take as manager. It was let the clubhouse kind of dictate itself, or he kind of take control of it right away. And he let the clubhouse do that. And they had some guys that just didn't coexist together. And that thing spiraled pretty quickly when they got, I think they were like 8-21 or something in April. And it's just a bunch of bad apples. And that thing just got out of control. And when you allow that to happen as a manager, you never can really regain that. And the White Sox really can't afford to do that again. They can't afford to have a guy come in and not set. Look, what is the culture I'm being honest with you. Like, what is the culture of the Chicago White Sox? What is that even look like right now? I think they had a lot for a team that lost 120 games. I've been in a lot of clubhouses. Obviously you have, when it's a good clubhouse, a bad clubhouse, and it was a really good clubhouse. It just was a really bad team. But I don't really know what culture the White Sox have right now. And I think they got that might be the number one priority.
Well, the best part for this new manager, whoever that may be, he doesn't have to establish a culture. The culture's been established the last 100+ years down there. It's a South Side team, right? Nothing against the Cubs, but you know what you get when you're going to Wrigley Field. When you go down to the South Side, you're getting that, blue collar fan that's making sacrifices at home in order to bring his family. Tickets aren't so cheap anymore. I went to Dodger Stadium for $7 a ticket with my dad, right? Dodger Dog was still $30, but you sit there, you don't have to worry about establishing a culture. And frankly, my only piece of advice, or if I were in this spot, I wouldn't tell the fans or tell the press anything. I would lead with my actions. Ozzie did a tremendous job of that every spring training. We sat down the first day. He set the standard, and we adhered to that standard. And let me tell you, like, we did some really stupid stuff, especially this guy right here. I did some really stupid stuff. I mean, stuff that Ozzie, I'm sure, would tell you, like, I almost kicked him off the team just because it was so dumb. But I never once dogged it on a ground ball. I never once didn't dive for a ball that we had a chance, that I had a chance to make the play on, whether we're up 5, tied, or down by 50. And the way you lose the fans in the South Side is you don't play the game the right way, because those guys are making sacrifices. That culture down there is pure grit, accountability, and play the game the right way. And if you field a team, a competitive team, they will never, ever go away.
So I want to get into some of these names, and there's some guys that you played against, maybe even played with. The guys at Sox on 35th came up with some of these names, and I do know for a fact that a couple of them have been interviewed. Will Venable, I co-host Inside the Clubhouse with Bruce Levine on The Score. He confirmed that he had been interviewed. He's an interesting candidate to me. He spent some time with the Cubs. You got Skip Schumacher, who's a 2023 National League Manager of the Year. I don't think he wants the job from what I heard, but you know what? There's 30 plus of these. So do you sit it out? I know that's a very popular, that's what David Ross did. Like, I love the idea of David Ross, but this team doesn't make sense for David Ross. Like, he's earned the right to, kind of wait out a better job. Clayton McCullough, I'm going to push pause on him for a second, because I think he's the front runner. Buck Showalter, like, I don't even want that's no.
We'll talk about it.
No. What's that?
I said, we'll talk about him.
Buck Showalter, Phil Nevin, Will Venable, Daniel Descalso, another former player, George Lombard, the Tigers bench coach, and then the Padres special assistant to Major League staff and baseball operations, AJ Ellis. I mean, if you look at the back of a lot of these guys' baseball cards, they just hung it up a few years ago. So my question to you before we specifically get into a couple of these names are, does having managerial experience matter? And does being a former player matter, especially to this generation? Did it matter to you?
I'm going to keep beating the dead horse with the Ozzie thing, but that's the best reference I have, right? And I'm playing for a short period of time with Tito out in Boston, but there is some credibility there. But you know who he was. I knew who Ozzie Guillen was as a kid. I had his baseball card. You knew the type of player he was. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. So there's some value there. But I think we're in a new day and age now where having a managerial background doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. I remember when we played Tampa Bay, right? You see Joe Madden up there, and I wasn't too familiar with his background, but I just remember being like, man, these guys play hard for this guy, and the fans love him, and he's great with the media, and he's personable. And I thought to myself, like, that guy was 20 years younger. He would be my front runner for this particular job.
Well, I would love Joe Madden to be here, but again, I think he wants to manage again, but he also has earned the right to pick his spot. And I think that's what makes this job, I think, it's kind of hard for two reasons. It's hard to establish, the White Sox would be foolish not to consider any Hall of Fame manager, but not where you are. You need to be honest with who you are as a club. And so, like, let's hit Buck Showalter, right? I mean, look at where the Mets just finished. The Mets just went to Game 6 of the NLCS. They got rid of Buck. They moved on from Buck Showalter. He's got a long, successful career as a manager. He also wears out his welcome a lot. Why would Buck Showalter? I know why he would want the job. He wants to stay in the game, but why would the White Sox consider a guy like Buck Showalter?
So I talked to one of my former coaches, and Buck Showalter's, in my opinion, is very much in the mix. But as far as strategically, I see Buck Showalter as maybe what Tony La Russa might have been with a little bit longer leash. Maybe a 3 to 4 year, groom another manager in waiting, kind of like Will Venable was doing with Bruce Bochy out in Texas, right? So Buck Showalter, I think he has a pedigree. He has the history. He will definitely get the players to play the right way. But Buck's very much old school, got the old school mentality. I know that a lot of this analytical shift and some of the player exertion, energy management type stuff on the field didn't really sit well with him. So he may get a little pushback there, and that's the reason why it may not be a good fit.
I mean, that's one reason. Let's go with Will Venable. I mean, that's you just talked about. Cardinals bench coach. You have actually, I think he was with the Rangers, and then you had Daniel Descalso as the Cardinals bench coach. But when you look at Venable, here's a guy who's put the work. Some of these guys, how it works. You put your career in as a player, and that gets you a lot of credibility, but it doesn't mean you can technically just necessarily turn it over and manage. So then you got to go into coaching. It's something that you've spent time doing. It's something that you've spent time. I want to use your career just in the college ranks here in the last few years, what you've been doing when I talk about a guy like Will Venable or Descalso, because what does that experience mean to a guy like Venable? What has it meant to you as you try to find your identity and take it into, because you can apply what you've learned, BA, right? Sure. You could take all first round pick, come into a winning organization, a team that's off of World Series, all the expectations, etc. You had some hiccups, but you can't, there's more to just being a player and taking player experience when you're moving on to coaching.
Yeah. And in full disclosure, when I became a coach, boy, did I learn really fast how much goes into putting a good product on the field. And a lot of it has nothing to do with hitting ground balls, BP, all that stuff, right? And from a college level, it's even more tedious, the recruiting schedule, right? Building practice plans. So I leaned heavily on, Ben Greenspan and, Chip Hale, those guys, to watch them build those things out. It takes time, and it takes some serious office work and collaboration there. But we talked about a few different candidates, and there's a few horses in this race that I'm a little biased towards in a good way, right? Like, I've known Will Venable for 15 plus years, not only as a player, but we trained together in the off season in San Diego with Todd Durkin and a bunch of other guys like Nick Hundley, Pryor, Chris Young, bunch of baseball guys. So with him, he's a really special candidate for a couple reasons. Number one, his pedigree playing, right? He's loved by all. He's got a great reputation in baseball, but he also brings that Ivy League component to the analytical part as well, right? Princeton grad with Chris Young down there, right? Played basketball, multi-sport athlete. So he can really see things from that 50,000 square foot lens that other managerial candidates may not be able to see.
Do you feel this like Descalso? He's a guy like 5 years ago that finished his career with the Cubs. I don't know if he's, cut out of the same Venable cloth, but he seems like a guy that could be, like a guy that's had a successful career, had a nice long career as a player, got into coaching. I mean, look, he's sitting next to a manager seat as it is right now, and St. Louis might have an opening as early next year if it goes south yet again. So when I'm looking at this list, I kind of have like Venable, Descalso in the same area of my of how I've broken it down. Maybe George Lombard's knocking on that door too. I mean, he's been learning in the division with AJ Hinch, but I mean, is that how you see like this list too when you're talking about another former player like Descalso?
Sure. I mean, I have Will Venable higher up than that. I got.
So
Will,
is he your favorite? Like, if you were picking,
he's in my top two. He's in my top two, but to Descalso, to his point, you rewind the clock, right? You ever want to look back at an amazing team from manager, pitching coach, right? With Dave Duncan and that 2011 championship Cardinals team, that team was incredible, right? and I'm a little partial, right? Because these guys like play with my buddy Chris Duncan, who passed away, but he's an incredible candidate because he's got that winning championship pedigree. So they will definitely take that kind of stuff into account, because what are we trying to do on the South Side, right? We're trying to turn things around, and how you turn things around is you have to have someone that's done it at a high level, and having a World Series ring and having success at that level really, really goes a long way with the younger players.
This is where I get a little bit like this is not that easy to me. Like, it just, I look at where the Sox are, and I'll be honest with you, BA, I don't see a scenario where they technically have a competitive window open until 2027. I just, even so, I'm assuming you trade Garrett Crochet in the offseason for, some monster players back, and I'm thinking bats here. You look at like the Baltimore, I keep saying the Baltimore Orioles at some point have to show desperation if they're serious about winning a World Series. Are they going to spend $250 million on Corbin Burns? I don't know. My guess is no. You get 2 years of Garrett Crochet, and you got a boatload of stud bats in the minor leagues that are ready to play for you right now on the South Side. That seems like a mix. But my point is, like, I look at, does winning a World Series matter? Does having a World Series ring matter when you're coming in at the ground level of a rebuild? This thing is so bottomed out that, like, you can show you guys your World Series ring and talk about, like, this is what it looks like. But a lot of these guys, I look at this like almost like 2012, 2013 Cubs when Theo came in. And it's like you're signing guys off the street to go, hey, you can play here and start here, but you're not going to be part of it when it's time to win. And I kind of feel that same thing about the manager. And that might be unfair. But again, there's only 30 plus of these jobs. So
no kidding,
does that stuff matter? Because, like, you can make an argument that, well, the Sox are still in transition. Do they just let Grady Sizemore keep going? Do they bring up Sergio Santos from AA? Do they bring up Justin Jershely from AAA, like he was the third base coach? Because every time I try to, like, talk myself into a Venable or Clayton McCullough, I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to be a lot easier when there was the Mike Sochas, the Joe Maddens and the Terry Franconas just sitting there waiting for a job, right? And that's just not the case right now. But again, I think if you're Chris Getz, a new GM, right, and having rebuild that roster and a manager, I think are not mutually exclusive, right? Like I think he's going to do with what he can with the front office as far as, like, what direction do we want to go, right? Are we just going to wear it and try to win 60 games next year? Or are we going to clean house and go young like Tampa Bay's done, like a couple other teams have done recently, like the Detroit Tigers were like, hey, we got some solid young veteran leadership here, but let's call up Sweeney and a couple of these other dudes and see what they can do, and look what happens, right? And again, back to the culture thing, I think if you get the right guy in there and he has those players motivated to show up to the field every day, winning sucks, man. Losing sucks. Winning is so much fun. Losing, I don't care if you have 5 Hall of Famers on your team. It's just not going to be the same energy as it is if you were really, really cruising down the stretch. But you're a professional, man. I know I keep going back to the players, but ultimately it's going to be on the players, right? You can have the best manager in the world who has your back, but he'll never, ever be able to take an at-bat for you. Whoever the new manager is never going to be able to toe the rubber or run the bases for you. You got to do that on your own. These guys are making millions of dollars. So it starts with that. That starts with setting the standard and adhering to the culture that the Southside fans deserve, right? You got to play the game hard. And anybody else they bring in, like, to me, is a bonus, right? And then you start talking about that separately.
So I want to talk about Clayton McCullough for a second, because there are multiple reports. I know Bruce, he told me 2 weeks ago that he's the front runner for the job, and Sports Illustrated had a piece. I think it was as early as yesterday. Yeah, no, actually today. They reported this today, and there's a quote in here from an American League coach about the White Sox opening, and the quote is, "I was told not to get my hopes up for the job. They love McCullough and think his background and pedigree, he's the perfect manager to help develop and grow with the young group they are building there." Okay, so just as some background for those of you who don't know about him, this goes back to, again, this was a report by Bruce Levine back in September. He's 44. I like that. It basically, puts us, like, he's up my age, let's be honest. Like, has a solid background in baseball. He played his minor league career with the Toronto Blue Jays as a catcher. We all know about catchers and managers and how supposedly the only players that could ever manage are catchers. I'm just kidding about that. He was in the farm system from 06 to 14. The Dodgers brought him in 15 as their minor league coordinator, and he's been with them ever since. So here's what I like about that. It's like right when I'm able to like talk myself out of guys like this, I come right back to it and go, okay, so here's a guy that's been basically coaching since he's been in the minor leagues, never really had a successful major league career, and caught on with an organization like the Dodgers 10 years ago. And you know what the Dodgers are about. I mean, they're first class. Of course, they spend money like it's going out of business, but they have a RSN deal. They have an $8 billion TV contract.
Is that it?
When people, yeah, that's it. When people bitch about, well, the Dodgers do it. The Dodgers do it because they have a TV contract that'll never happen again. That TV contract got so many people fired, but the luxury of having that TV deal is you can be creative with deals. I mean, when you look at Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, you think you're watching an all-star game, and it just happens to be the Dodgers every single night. But a guy like that, I mean, this is what I love about the Dodgers. They do both. They spend and they develop. And their minor league system every year, they trade from it, they add to it, they trade from it, they add to it, they grow from within while they're adding from outside. I don't know a thing about the guy, but I certainly like the pedigree, and it doesn't seem like it's ironic that we're sitting here and the World Series hasn't started yet and the Dodgers are in it and the White Sox don't have a manager.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. This is like a math, not magic type deal, right? We talk about how Major League Baseball doesn't like when you make major announcements, like A-Rod telling you his hamstrings pulled like in Game 7, right? You're like, what are you doing? But, to your point, I think the longer we wait, and as you see a managerial candidate not be announced, if it goes all the way through the rest of this World Series, it definitely increases McCullough's chances tenfold, because that would be the main reason why they're waiting. But again, there's just so many people in the mix, and full disclosure, I've known Chris Getz a long time, and I've tried to be respectful of this process and respect his space and everything. But man, he's keeping this one close to the chest, right? And
I think that's the right move.
Yeah, I think it is too. You're right. I mean, right now, the less information, the better. Kind of live by the sword, die by the sword. You go get the guy you want, and you put your stamp on it, and you go hit the gas from there and see what happens, right? Like, he's going to be damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation, right? Like, if you hire Buck Showalter, he's too old. If you hire Will Venable, he's not seasoned enough. He's never been a manager. So we're gonna torch him either way, right? So,
but they've kind of earned, right? Like, you reap what you sow, and when you've had 222 losses in 2 years, I mean, people are chomping at the bit to tell you how wrong you are. So get it right. And I like the less is more, say nothing approach right now that Chris gets. I think no one wants to hear words anymore. Pedro Grifol was a word salad, man. Mm-hmm. That guy coming up with all the catchphrases and play fast and all bullshit. Like, it was all bullshit. Like, coming up with T-shirts and acronyms that didn't even make sense for a team that wasn't built for that. Like, I don't want to see that anymore.
Yeah, T-shirts are sweet when you're dominating. Like, Joe Madden could walk out there in a jock strap and hit ground balls and be like, this is sweet. When they were cruising, man, like Chris Bryant's mural on the side of walls and Rizzo just walking around town, can't go anywhere, right? I mean, that you could do whatever you want, but the White Sox, they need to get back on that path, right, in order to do that kind of stuff.
As a former player and a guy who, to be honest with you, like, I'm not breaking any news here by saying that your career didn't go the way you wanted it to, but you'll forever always, as long as I know you and anybody else, you're a White Sox. I mean, that's who drafted you. That's who you came up with. They traded Aaron Rowan for Tommy and gave you the starting spot in center field. Like I said, to start this podcast, you had that diving catch in the blackout game, but doesn't it piss you off that this is where the White Sox are? I mean, completely, not just the laughingstock of baseball, but of sports. Like, that last week of the season, when they're on the first 5 minutes of SportsCenter, that the White Sox were on it for every single night as they got closer and closer to breaking the record. I hope, and I think it does. I hope it does. That should piss them off more than it pisses me off. And doesn't something like that piss you off too?
Yeah, it's concerning. And the crazy part now is there's been this big time generational shift, right? Like all the guys I played with are either retired or in a front office position or coaching, right? And so you want to go back to what you know, and you want to go back to the locker room and you say, Chris Getz has been discussed as a possible general manager for years, right? Even when he was a player. He has that Michigan background. He keeps it light, but he also is able to, be polished in certain situations, unlike myself, right? This is me all the time. But
that's why you're with me. Sorry.
Yeah, right. That's why I'm not hitting fungos. I'm standing next to a 12-foot giraffe. But, I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, they put Chris Getz in this position. This is his first legitimate hire, right? His first big hire. Let's see what happens, right? I think the White Sox have just been teeter-tottering back and forth for these past 5 years. And then that's what frustrates the fans. The fans, again, they're going to be okay with losing. Like if you lose and you're competing your butt off, you could say, man, we didn't have the pitching this year, or shoot, we were 1 or 2 bats short, hitters short. But man, you were spot on. Watching the highlights this year, when it rains, it pours. It took me back to a dark place, right? Like it took me back to that year in 2006 where I just felt like I couldn't get anything going, right? And believe me, I knew who I got traded for, because every time I went to center field, yes, they were chanting, "Bring back Rowan." I'm like, listen, guys, I'm hitting $180, need you. So yeah, it's frustrating for everybody, and I don't think anyone's proud of that. But that's why I've encouraged, the 2005 20-year anniversary is coming up next year. I think it'd be a great opportunity to get some of those guys back, some of my former teammates and myself, bring a different energy there. And hopefully when we show up, whether that be in, April, May, whenever that is, the White Sox have some momentum going and can get some fans in there. And let me tell you, the fans, they have every excuse in the book. They have every right to not show up. But this is a great opportunity. You can look, man, we stank. There's no pathway for us to be good this year. But you know what? Let's see what it looks like out of the gate. Show up, bring energy, and then that way you can sit back and talk to Chris or Jerry, whoever, and then you can have an axe to grind there. But that was the worst season we've all ever seen. It cannot get any worse than that.
Well, I don't think we'll ever see anything like it again. I mean, it took 62 years to top it. So
never.
Certainly not in our lifetimes are we going to see something like that. It just sucks that it was the Chicago White Sox. You brought up something I want to get to. There's 2 more things I want to hit on, and one of them is something you just mentioned. Because as a guy who has spent time coaching, and I know how much you love it and how much you feel like it's part of that's who you are and part of who you want to be. One thing that has frustrated me about the White Sox, not take the manager out of it, the staffs. I think when you look up and down some of the staffs, and I'm not talking just about baseball, go look at the Detroit Lions coaching staff, right? Everyone thinks Dan Campbell. You look at their, I know not every sport's the same, but this is where I'm going here. Who coaches wide receivers for the Detroit Lions? Antoine Randall L. Who coaches defense? Aaron Glenn. Who coaches running back? Scotty Montgomery. Who coaches offensive line? Hank Fraley. I think I've looked at this a few times, by the way, because I'm just reciting this off the top of my head. All of these guys played those positions and now are coaching them in the NFL. You look at the White Sox. You look at that 2005, and I here's what sucked. We always have to go back to 2005, but at least we had 2005. You had Greg Walker, successful career in the big leagues as a hitter and just at that position of first base. Harold Baines, obviously. Tim Raines, obviously. Joey Cora, obviously. Right? These guys were respected players at their spots. So when they're giving you instruction, boom, boom, boom. I've looked up and down. I thought one of, when the White Sox hired Robin Ventura, and I know, he fought back even wanting that job. I thought, man, can you get a Gene Lamont as your bench coach? A guy who's a former manager who could just sit there and be like, here you go, kid. And they got Mark Parent. And I was like, that's awful. And they had Pedro Grifol had one. And I just don't think there was much interest in a guy who'd already done the job in Toronto. And I look at that staff, hitting coach. I think Ethan Katz is kind of he's earned the right to stay on staff. I think some people might fight that. He's done a lot with very little, especially bullpens.
And real quick, and to interject on that,
yeah,
I don't know Katz well. I haven't established a relationship with him till we start communicating while some guys are rehabbing and everything. And let me tell you, the dedication from him Again, win, lose, or draw with that guy, he's putting in the work. And so I will go to bat for him and say, like, that guy knows his stuff and he's putting in the work, and his care factor is a 12 out of 10. So at least with that, you can rest your head at night, right? Don Cooper, right? Legend in the game.
Yeah.
He was so good that he had established a precedent, right? Had established an energy and was like master of his craft. But every one of our pitchers was a dog, right? Like, he demanded, like, I don't care if you get shelled, dude, figure it out. Like, Burley, man, hey, Coop, I don't throw a bullpen today. Arm's killing me. Don't fucking throw a bullpen then. I don't care. Like, It doesn't matter. But, I just think right now it's so tough because you want to push these guys, but you have half the people saying, well, we can't push them because we don't want them to blow out. And the other guy's like, dude, let them hit the gas. Like, you're paying them $30 million over however many years. Like, throw them out there. If you blow out, you blow out. That's what you have surgeons for, man.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm like if people are here, like, people are going to go, like, who the hell's, they're going to go look at rosters in big leagues and be like, look at these coaching staffs. They had success, but I look at the Dodgers. Dave Roberts, has probably the most famous stolen base in the history of baseball
ever.
Mark Pryor is their pitching coach. Josh Bard is their bullpen coach. Bob Guerin is their major league field coordinator. You know what I mean? Like, Aaron Boone, right? Successful careers, it doesn't always translate. Great player, great man. I get it. But when you're bringing in guys where people are like Googling, okay, Pedro Grifol, and then you start Googling his staff, bad sign. That's my question, I guess, is how important, the manager's important, but how important are all of the other ancillary coaching roles? Because those are the guys that you as a player are actually working with day in and day out.
It's huge. I mean, I'm going to reference Greg Walker here, obviously, because we spent so much time in the cage together. But you look at a guy like Mike Gellinger, right? Yeah. Who didn't have the notoriety in the playing career, but perfect supplemental coach to Greg Walker in the cages with you, right? In the trenches with you, who will feed you baseballs and throw BP to you nonstop until you can't swing anymore, right? But, to your point, Greg Walker, those guys are White Sox. Harold Baines is a White Sox. Tim Raines played for the Expos, but he's a White Sox, right? All those guys have so much blood, sweat, and tears poured into the organization. So there's an extreme value add to bringing back guys that have a history with the team. And I'll talk about myself. I struggled so much consistently at the plate, right? And I was just constantly searching. But, man, having Greg Walker and Harold Baines at the top step to lean on saved my butt, right? Like, I was constantly just sitting there going, just searching for answers, searching for, like, what do I do? Where do I put my hands? How do I get on base? How do I compete? So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of credibility to be said when you got a Hall of Famer sitting there, giving you your card on where he thinks you should play defense and stuff. So I think, but again, it's going to start with piece number one, right? Yeah. You don't know who you can hire until you get the first piece in place. You hire Will Venable, or you hire Skip Schumacher, Buck Showalter, or McCullough, right? Whoever that may be. Then you set the coaching staff out from there.
Yeah, I'm not going to judge the hire until it's made, and unless it's Buck Showalter, I have a wait and see approach. I got excited when Pedro Grifol at his press conference and told me and Chuck on the White Sox Talk podcast. He did an interview with us immediately afterwards and said, "We're going to prepare to kick your ass every day." And it was it was the complete 180 of what we had just heard from the La Russa staff. That I was like, "Oh, let's go! This guy's going to kill it," and it didn't work out. So, less is more. Shut your mouth. Build a staff. Have some credibility that way, and let's see what you build. Last thing I have for you. You said that Venable would be in your top two. So who's that other one?
Well, again, I'm a selfish SOB, so I'm going to pick guys that I have a history with and I really respect and I love to death. Like, really love the way they go about their business. So, two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Not that this guy I'm about to mention is not smart, but you got Will Venable, Princeton background. He's a silent assassin, right? He's really quiet, but also will show emotion in a given situation. But, great baseball pedigree, smart, articulate, has the wherewithal and ability to make snap decisions. My other guy is Skip Schumacher for a couple reasons. He played, again, with my friend Chris Duncan. I've known Skip for 15, 20 years. The grit we were talking about, the accountability we were talking about, and the guy that will get you to run through a brick wall, that's that guy. So I don't know if he's the best fit for the White Sox against the other candidates, right? Only time will tell. But, I mean, look at the comment he made against when they played the Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani, right? When Shohei had 15 home runs in that game or something. He's like, F that, man. I'm going to pitch to that guy. And that says a lot. That says a lot. Like, we're not pandering. We're not going to back down. We're not going to fold. The fans all come here. We're not going to pull LeBron and sit to rest. Like, we're gonna come here and we're gonna give the fans what they want. If the pitcher's not trying to give up a home run, if he takes them deep, he takes them deep. So, man, I like Skip because of the grit. And you mentioned earlier, he's the 2023 Manager of the Year. You don't go sugar to shit overnight. So
right.
he's got it in him, right? And it's just a matter of surrounding him and giving him some ammo. I think he would do a phenomenal job.
All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here with two questions. I'll start with the first one. You'd be not surprised. Here, you'd be very surprised if the White Sox hired
George Lombard, only because I think he's got a good thing going with AJ Hinch. They're up and up with the young staff or young players, young roster. I think he's in a good spot. Joey Cora's over there. They got a good thing going.
You would not be surprised if the White Sox hired
Buck Showalter. I only say that because I only say that because of the history.
A BA bomb at the end.
I get it. I got to hit you with it. I didn't want to mention it earlier. I didn't want you to fold. I didn't want you to melt down mid-episode. So I'm sorry. But, hey, Buck Showalter, these guys have done it. They need to get someone in there that's done it at a high level for a long time. If they decide to go that route, he has the experience. And if they're going experience, man, we're going to be having a lot more heated exchanges here. I'm going to have to pick you up so you don't get too excited.
No, my microphone's not off. I just stopped talking. You've got me. You got me. 37 minutes in, you drop a bomb.
Sorry, buddy.
And here we are. But wow. Well, I would be surprised. So I love it. We already have something to fight about. And what do you think, man? The first episode is in the books. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. We're week to week, right? We're week to week. Like,
yeah, well, listen. If we get 14 views and I don't hear from you next week, then I'll just assume that I'll take the hint. Okay,
take the draft and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we might even have a breaking news podcast as soon as this week. So let's see when the White Sox hire George Lombard and Buck Showalter as their bench coach. You know, it'll be we'll sit there and say I told you so.
Yeah, you ain't kidding, man.
BA, love you, brother. Glad we're doing this. We'll look forward to the next one, and we'll keep on keeping on.
See you, dude. This
has been the White Sox Recap Podcast. Like, listen, download, subscribe. We're going to have plenty more fun along the way. Guests, surprise guests. BA's got quite the it's the old term, the old Rolodex of teammates, former coaches, execs. We're going to get a bunch of guys on. We're going to have more fun than anything else, and we look forward to the next one. For Brian Anderson, I'm Ryan McGuffey. We'll see you next time.